The best old-time radio from people you trust. The Radio Nostalgia Network, where the oldies are still young.
It's a foggy night, a perfect night for a mystery. Tonight, Mystery Theater presents Mystery Thriller.
Of course, I knew Mr. Gu by reputation. As CEO of the New World Group, a company with government and allegedly triad connections, he was the face of the new, increasingly capitalist Shanghai, respected and feared in equal measure. So when he called and asked me to be his guest here in the elegant bar of the Dynasty Club, high above the harbour, I knew this was more than a casual courtesy to me in my role as chief of the Special Case Squad. Mr. Gu, and here a line from The Godfather springs to mind, was shortly to make me an offer I would find difficult to refuse.
Inspector Chen, When Red is Black by Zhu Xiaolong, dramatized by John Harvey.
You Guoming? Hello?
Detective, this is Party Secretary Lee. My apologies for calling you at home.
That's quite all right, Party Secretary.
Something politically sensitive has come up and Chief Inspector Chen seems to have gone missing. The Bureau doesn't know where he is. He's not at home and his cell phone's switched off.
Is there something I can do, Party Secretary?
Yin Li Ge. Does that name mean anything to you?
Not immediately, I'm afraid.
She wrote a book based on her experiences during the Cultural Revolution, Death of a Chinese Professor. It aroused a good deal of controversy at the time. She was labelled a dissident and withdrew from public view, all but forgotten. Until today.
What's happened?
Yin's body has been found in the Schickelmann house where she lived on Treasure Garden Lane. She's been murdered. The neighbourhood police have sealed off the crime scene and taken charge of the body. The medical examiner has been informed. Unless Chief Inspector Chen returns in the small hours, I want you to take charge of the investigation. For the time being, at least. Liaise with the local police, make as full a report as you can about the circumstances of the death. You know the drill.
Yes, Party Secretary, of course.
Yes, Party Secretary. No, Party Secretary. 3 bags full, Party Secretary.
Hey, Chen, for heaven's sake, what's got into you?
You. Kowtowing to a man who just days ago quashed all our hopes of having an apartment of our own. A 2-bedroom apartment to which we'd been properly assigned.
Look, I realise that was a disappointment.
Disappointment? More of a disgrace.
But the Party Secretary explained
Of
that...
course he did. And did he explain how it was that after all your years of service, we're still condemned to live as a family in what was once your father's dining room? While Party Secretary Lee's brother-in-law...
Hey, Chen, be careful what you say.
Party Secretary Lee's brother-in-law has been able to purchase a brand new apartment at the price of 4,000 yuan per square foot.
You don't know that for a fact.
10 times what you earn in a month.
It's just... Well, it's just the way it is.
Yes, the way it is now. Not the way it was meant to be.
We should eat these pork buns before they get cold.
I think I've lost my appetite.
Imagine it, Chen Sao. The new world. Shopping, entertainment and offices all within the same complex. And at the centre, brand new, high-end residential properties designed in the traditional Schickelmann style.
Schickelmann?
Of course. All the architectural splendour of the 30s, but with air conditioning, central heating and every modern convenience you could think of.
But why so old-fashioned instead of something contemporary and new?
Because our market research tells us that's what people want. A new moneyed class is rising up fast and longing for a tradition they can call their own. Books about the golden days of Shanghai are selling like hotcakes. The Paris of the East, the Oriental Pearl. If we can recreate that, it will appeal not only to the Shanghainese, it will attract visitors from all over the world.
And the city government, they're happy to support the project?
Of course. On one hand, they can point to the preservation of Shanghai's culture, and on the other, there will be a considerable increase in income for the government itself.
So everything is tied up?
Almost. While most of the finance is in place, we still need investment from abroad. Several American venture capital companies are seriously interested, but to convince them, we need a detailed business proposal in English that's not too literal, not too old-fashioned, poetic even, expressive of Shanghai's culture and history. And you, Cheng Cao, are just the man for the job.
I don't know. I don't really
We will
think...
pay American rates, of course. 50 cents per Chinese word.
That's more than generous. But at the moment, I'm overwhelmed by work at the Bureau, and I don't know if I could find the time.
Very well, for rush service, we'll pay 1.5 times the standard rate, 75 cents a word. And as far as your work at the Bureau is concerned, in circumstances like these, if you applied for a week's leave, a fortnight even, it would be looked on sympathetically, I'm sure.
What Gu is offering me amounts to a small fortune. 75 cents per word at about 1,000 Chinese characters per page for a total of 50 pages would come to over 30,000 American dollars, equivalent to 300,000 yuan, an amount it would take 30 years to earn in my present post. Some months, many months, if it were not for the small amounts I make from translating foreign mystery novels, I would find it difficult to make ends meet. And now that my mother's health is deteriorating, there are medical bills that will only increase. As Confucius says, there are things a man can do, and things a man cannot do. But which is which? Let me talk to Party Secretary Li. I would need to ask for time away from my desk.
He won't refuse you, I know. Here, have some more wine to celebrate.
Thank you.
And please, take this as an advance. 10,000 yuan on account.
There is a moment when I hesitate, uncertain. But then my hand reaches out for the envelope Gu is offering, and, with a nod of thanks, I slip it down into my coat pocket, out of sight. If there's an unseen line I have just stepped over, I'm not sure where it is, or why. Except that I have been irritated lately by the seas of party documents and the mountains of political meetings my job seems increasingly to entail. And then there was the business with Yu's new apartment, promised and then denied. A loss of face for me, as well as a blow for Yu and Pei Chin. As the proverb says, you have to think about the master's face before you kick a dog. So in taking Gu's money, maybe I was making a little kickback of my own.
How long have you been the residence cop here, old Yang?
Oh, more years than I care to remember. Be careful, Detective Yu. The stairs are very narrow here. Oh, these old houses. They should have been pulled down years ago. Here. This was Yin's room.
It's little more than a cubicle.
Just space for a bed, a desk, a wardrobe and a single chair.
And this is where a body was found?
Yes. When Lan Lan, who lives on the eastern wing, returned from the food market at around 6:40 yesterday, she noticed that Yin's door was open, which was strange, as she never left the door unlocked, and she knew Yin was in the habit of leaving early to practice Tai Chi and didn't normally return until after 8. So, after calling Yin's name, she peered round the edge of the door. It looked, she said, as if the room had been ransacked. Belongings everywhere, drawers pulled out and thrown to the floor. Opening the door further, she saw Yin herself, stretched out on the floor.
What did she do then?
Well, she raised the alarm, checked for a pulse and started doing CPR, but it was no good. By the time I arrived, internal security were already here.
Internal security? Who called them?
I've no idea. But they took photographs of the body, quizzed Lan Lan, gave the place a thorough going over.
Did they take anything?
But not as far as I could see.
I'll have to talk to Lan Lan myself. Obviously, the other neighbours too. Perhaps you can make me a list.
Yes, of course.
You said that Yin went out early to practice Tai Chi?
Yes, at People's Park.
Don't suppose there's any way of telling how long she would have been back before Lan Lan found her?
As a matter of fact, there is. Xiong, the milkwoman, saw her coming back at 6:15.
Which, if it's confirmed, means Yin was murdered sometime between 6:15 and when Lan Lan found her almost 30 minutes later.
Yeah, so it would seem.
With some reluctance, Chief Inspector, I've agreed to your having 2 weeks' vacation so that you may carry out certain important work of your own, important to the city government. But there is one stipulation I hope you'll agree to.
If it's within my power, then of course.
I want you to keep an executive eye on the investigation into Yin Li Ge's murder.
Is that really necessary? Detective Yu is an experienced officer, as you know. I discussed the case with him on the phone earlier today, and from what he told me, he seems to be proceeding along exactly the right lines.
Even so, I'd feel happier if I knew you were keeping an eye on things. Cases like this, involving a dissident writer, always bring the foreign press out of their holes, lecturing us about free speech and civil rights. I wouldn't put it past them to go so far as to suggest the government had a hand in Yin's murder. Ridiculous, of course.
Of course.
Has Detective Yu come to any conclusions as to a motive?
It's still too early to say. Robbery is one possibility, of course, given the fact that her room seems to have been searched, albeit not in a very methodical way. But all the signs are that Yin was quite poor and just about living from day to day. Detective Yu will have made the usual request, of course, through the Bureau for details of any bank accounts she may have had.
What about enemies? Someone from her past, perhaps?
Internal security may be in a position to help there. I assume they will have kept a file on her because of her dissident status?
I'll request a copy be sent to you at your office immediately.
For several days now, I have missed my early morning ritual of sitting here quietly at the same bench in the park, listening to the sounds of the birds and the river nearby. Far better to read Yin Li Ge's file here rather than in the office, where the phone may go at any moment, calling me away. Clipped to the inside of the folder is what I assume to be a recent picture showing a tall bamboo-thin woman in her mid-50s. Someone who feels life has failed them. Yin had become a zealous member of the Red Guard, falling from favour at the end of the 60s and being sent to a Kader school in the country for re-education. After the revolution, she returned to her college and, while there, wrote Death of a Chinese Professor, in which she denounced the Cultural Revolution. It was only when it was translated into English and picked up by the West that it was banned, and Yin labelled a dissident. A small volume of Yang's poetry she edited aside, it doesn't look as if Yin had published anything else, although it seems she'd recently been selected for membership of the Shanghai Writers Association. There's nothing here that suggests a motive for her murder, and certainly nothing that suggests a reason why the government might have been involved.
Detective Yu Guangming?
Chen here. Just wondering how things are progressing.
Morning, boss. We've got the medical examiner's report. Yin was suffocated to death with a soft object, a pillow almost certainly. The most likely time, between 6:15 and 6:30. In other words, just before the body was discovered. As far as I can see, there are two possibilities. Either the murderer was an outsider who followed Yin to her room, or she was killed by one of the other Shikuman residents. Old Liang's made a list of the most likely suspects, and I'm interviewing them later this morning. Oh, and there's one other development. In addition to the milkwoman's evidence, Peng Ping, the shrimp woman who works directly opposite the rear door, swears that nobody went in or out between Lan Lan returning and the ambulance arriving.
Good. If anything interesting comes up during the interviews, you'll let me know?
Will do.
Believe me, Detective Yu, I tried to befriend her many times. If I saw her in the courtyard or on a landing outside her room, I always greeted her, but she never as much as smiled in return.
You have to understand, Detective. During the Cultural Revolution, I was part of a team of thought propaganda workers, trained to re-educate those who'd been exposed to Western bourgeois ideas. So when I learned Yin had written a book about those times, naturally I bought a copy. And when I read what she had to say, I tore the book in pieces in front of her door.
I can guess what old Liang has already told you, Detective Yu. Before 1949, this whole building was owned by my father, who was executed as a counter-revolutionary in the early 50s when the building was confiscated. Since then, I've lived in a small room, partitioned off in the south wing. As far as Yin Liga is concerned, though we were living in the same building, I doubt if I set my eyes on her more than a dozen times in half as many years.
In the end, I just turned my back on her. As I said to my neighbours, to do anything else was like pressing your hot face against a cold arse. What was the point?
I won't deny it, why should I? I'm not sorry that she's dead. As far as I'm concerned, it was little more than she deserved. Trying to turn back history with that bourgeois book of hers. Good riddance to her and her kind.
So I wore a capitalist blackboard and Yin a Red Guard armband. So what? That was long ago. And if old Yang imagines I've been harbouring resentment all these years, he couldn't be more wrong. A man my age can't afford to live in the past. And besides, like most of the Red Guards, Yin would have suffered enough as it was.
So, husband, how was your day?
Oh, other than leaving me with a headache, exhausted and confused.
Was it really so bad?
Oh, to some of the other residents where Yin lived, she was a bourgeois intellectual. To others, a relic of the Maoist revolution. None of them liked her, but I can't see any of them disliking her enough to want to kill her.
But does it have to be someone from the same building?
Not necessarily, though it's difficult to see how someone else could have got in and out of the building without being noticed. The front door was firmly bolted and there was someone watching the back.
It's like one of those locked room mysteries that Chen Sao translates.
That's just fiction.
Maybe, but pleasurable all the same. Trying to work out the identity of the murderer before the detective.
And do you?
Sometimes. And now I'm going to do my best to unravel the mystery of Yin Liga and the death of a Chinese professor.
And how do you think you're going to do that?
Start by reading the book, of course. It'll give me something more positive to do at work, if nothing else. As far as I can tell, it's pretty autobiographical. How she falls in love with an older man, Yang, the professor of the title, and then, well, I'll have to wait and see what happens.
That's easy. He dies.
Yes, but how? I read quite a lot of Yang's poetry in the early 70s and liked it a great deal. I'd like to know what happened to him and why.
Hello?
Still up, Chen Sao? Burning the midnight oil?
I'm still trying to get to grips with this proposal.
Well, please don't think I was calling to check up on you. I simply wanted you to know I'm sending you something tomorrow that will make your work easier.
Easier? I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Don't worry, all will be revealed soon enough.
Yes?
Chief Inspector Chen, good morning. I'm White Cloud, your little secretary, reporting for work.
I'm sorry, but I think there must be some mistake.
No, I don't think so. Mr. Gu's instructions were quite clear. As well as this new laptop, I've taken the liberty of bringing fresh coffee and some pork buns, in case you've not yet had breakfast.
The young woman standing in front of me, a college badge on her scarlet jacket, is little more than 18, 19 at most, her dark hair falling way past her shoulders, a smile simmering in her almond eyes. And it is embarrassment, an embarrassment I'm at a loss to understand, that forces me to look away. Mr. Gu should not have done this. The laptop, maybe, but he shouldn't have sent you here.
Why ever not?
It's not appropriate or necessary, not necessary at all.
You don't want me to lose my job, surely?
No, of course not, but,
Both my parents have been laid off, so I have to work to pay for my college tuition. If not as a little secretary for you, then I'll have to go back to working as a K-girl at the Dynasty Club. When you're poor, there are not so many choices. For a girl especially.
I'm sorry.
Don't be. You should be happy. All the Mr. Big Bucks have a little secretary these days. They're symbols of success, like owning a Mercedes.
But I'm not a Mr.
Not a Mr. Big Bucks. That I can see. And as long as we both understand each other, I'm sure it will all be fine. I will do whatever secretarial work you need, any research, answer your mail, answer the telephone, prepare your meals, do whatever is necessary to ensure your work goes as smoothly as possible.
But while White Cloud begins to reorganize the books in my small library, I am finding it more and more difficult to concentrate. The two of us in such close proximity in this small apartment, unbidden thoughts of what would have been expected of her as a K-girl, answering to her rich clients, race through my mind. It is a relief when the phone rings and breaks the tension.
Chen residence?
Oh, it's Detective Yu. Is Chief Inspector Chen there?
Just a moment, please. It's Detective Yu. Do you want to speak to him?
Yes, of course. Hello?
Who's that who answered your phone?
It doesn't matter.
It's okay, boss. No need to be embarrassed. You are a single man after all.
It was White Cloud. She's my new secretary.
Secretary?
Gu insisted on sending her to help while I'm working on this translation.
Of course, boss. The translation. I understand.
Detective Yu?
Yes, boss. I'm sorry.
What did you phone for, anyway?
We've had a response to our request for Yin's bank details. It seems that there were no accounts in her name, but she did have a safety deposit box at the Hangpo District branch of the Shanghai People's Bank. I'm going over there now.
Oh, wait. I'll come with you. This could be important. White Cloud can be checking through what I've done so far while I'm gone.
What do you think? Do you think this could hold the answer to why Yin was murdered?
We'll soon see. Chinese currency, but not a great deal. 2,000 yuan at most.
That's not all. Look here, US dollars.
At today's rate of exchange, that's roughly the same amount, no more. Scarcely enough to warrant a safe deposit box.
Something else underneath.
Let me see. I can see right away that it is a manuscript. No, not one, but two. The one a typewritten version of the other. And not a novel, as I might have expected, but poetry. Classical love poems from the Tang and Song dynasties that Yang has translated and Yin later edited. But why keep them locked away like this? And as for giving a clue as to why Yin was murdered, well, I don't see that this helps at all.
So we're back where we started?
So it would seem. I'll take this with me. It may be a help, but I'm afraid at the moment I can't see how.
Don't look so downhearted.
Sometimes it's difficult not to be.
Is Chin-Chin asleep?
He seems to be. Yeah, out to the world. Thumb in his mouth as usual.
Leave it. Don't risk waking him. I want to tell you about the death of a Chinese professor.
You finished it already?
Well, you know what a fast reader I am.
Even so.
And it's really interesting, especially after what's happened. She even uses their real names.
Hang on a minute. Just get comfortable.
Okay now?
Yeah, fine.
Right, well, I think you already know how they met.
At Carter School. Deep in the countryside somewhere.
Chipu.
All marshland out there.
Will you stop interrupting?
I'm sorry. Sorry.
So Yang was a kitchen helper and Yin, because she was younger, was working in the fields. They got to know one another just as friends at first, and then quite suddenly Yang fell sick with pneumonia and Yin took it upon herself to take care of him. That was at the time that President Nixon made his visit to China and it was no longer politically incorrect for people to learn English.
Yeah, I remember.
As he got better, Yang began to teach her English, and then, despite the difference in ages between them, Yin was only in her early 30s and Yang was in his mid-50s, and not a very healthy mid-50s at that. They fell in love. Just listen. Listen to this. After a day's labour, he would sometimes read poems to her in Chinese and then in English. He especially liked this poem written by a woman poet named Guan Daosheng in the 13th century called You and I. You and I are so crazy about each other, as hot as a potter's fire, out of the same chunk of clay, the shape of you, the shape of me. Crush us, both into clay again, mix it with water, reshape you, reshape me, so I have you in my body and you'll have me forever in yours too.
Doesn't leave much to the imagination, does it?
Well, you can imagine how it went down with Carter leaders. They were ordered not to speak to one another again, but in the face of repeated warnings, they simply refused. Despite his age and his health, Yang was sent out to work in the fields by day and made to sleep in an isolation room at night. Yin had half her hair shaved off and was forbidden to see Yang at all, even when he fell sick again. It wasn't until the very last day of his life that she was permitted to go to him, and he died in her arms. Not surprisingly, in the novel, Yin blamed the authorities for Yang's death, even though, because he hadn't been executed or beaten to death like some intellectuals, it was officially declared that he died of natural causes.
I suppose strictly that's true.
Well, Yin didn't see it that way. When belatedly a memorial service was held for Yang and he was posthumously restored to the party, Yin turned on one of the former Carter leaders who was there and spat in his face.
Don't suppose you remember the leader's name, do you?
No, but it's here somewhere. Chao Ming. Look, there's even a photograph.
It's interesting. Just the other day, I interviewed 2 residents of the building where Yin lived. One seemed to have come to terms with whatever happened to him, and the other was a bundle of angry resentment. Might be worth finding out which category Chao Ming comes into.
When will the endless cycle of the spring flower and the autumn moon come to an end? How much remembrance of things past does a heart know? Last night in the attic, revisited by the eastern wind, it was unbearable to look toward home in the fair moonlight.
Last night and then again this morning, I've been reading through the collection of poems found in the deposit box. And it doesn't take a great leap to picture Yin listening to Yang, reading those words deep in the night, and realize the enormous sentimental value the manuscript must have had for her. Perhaps that was reason enough for her to have kept it safely locked away. And more than that, perhaps she had hoped to get it published one day. Our find in the vault is still throwing up more questions than answers.
Thank you, Comrade Chao Ming, for agreeing to meet with me.
And thank you, Comrade Detective Yu, for suggesting that we talk here, rather than asking me to submit to an interview at the police bureau.
There was never any need for that, Comrade. As I explained on the phone, working on a homicide case, one has to look into every possible aspect. This is for background only.
Fine. But let me make one point first. With respect to what happened in the Cultural Revolution, we must have an historic perspective. None of us back then was capable of foretelling the future. We believed in Chairman Mao without question.
I understand that completely.
And you should not believe everything Yin wrote about those times in her novel. She makes a selling point of the so-called persecution she and Yang suffered in Carter School, ignoring the fact that, according to Chairman Mao, the top priority was for people to reform themselves, not fall in love.
Despite those misgivings, you attended Yang's memorial service.
My quarrel was never with Yang. Indeed, I made a point of allowing him books and dictionaries whenever possible. Even when someone reported he was writing a book, I decided not to interfere.
What kind of book?
I don't know, something in English, probably. When his room was searched after his death, we found nothing.
At the service, it's reported that Yin attacked you. Spat at you, in fact.
As you say, it's a matter of record.
How did that make you feel?
How do you think it made me feel? But if you're looking for a possible motivation that might have driven me to murder, Comrade, think again. All those years in Carter School, and at the end of the Cultural Revolution, what was my reward? 2 years of political examination, at the end of which my wife divorced me, discarded me like a dirty sock. Compared to that, Yin's spittle ran off my face like harmless rain.
I'm sorry. I have to ask you all the same. Where were you on the morning of February 7th?
I was in Anhui collecting debts for my company. There are a number of people who can testify to that if necessary.
Thank you, Comrade Zhao. I don't think there's any more questions. Look to the future, as the People's Daily always says.
Hello?
Comrade Chen.
Comrade Gu, greetings. And if you are calling to check on my progress, let me assure you that...
Comrade? Absolutely not. I simply wanted to inform you that a workman will be calling at your apartment later today to install an electric heater.
What? Electric? But I never ordered...
White Cloud says your room's far too cold. That can't be good for your work.
Cold? I don't know. I suppose I'm used to it. But even if it were, there's no way I could afford such a thing.
Comrade, you'll soon be a rich man. Besides, I have several units left over from a large supply I bought at discount some while ago. By the time you reckon in 3 years of depreciation, I could be practically giving them away. Which is what I'm doing, in a good cause.
You are placing me in your debt, Mr. Gu.
Nonsense. And besides, you don't want White Cloud to be less than happy, I'm sure. Where is she, by the way? Thought you might have answered your phone.
I sent her to the library to research the new terminology being used in marketing in the West.
Excellent. Make use of her in any way you can. She won't be at your beck and call forever, you know. Oh, and if you could send me over an early draft of what you've done so far, by tomorrow, say. One of the potential American investors is visiting. I'd like to give him a taste of what he and his colleagues can expect.
Very well. My reason for sending White Cloud back to the library is at least half true. The section of the proposal I'm working on deals with the centre's marketing plans. And while I have no problem understanding the Chinese text, I'm unsure how best to express the ideas for American eyes. Within the socialist state economy, marketing simply does not exist. For many years, Chinese people have cited the proverb, "If the wine smells wonderful, customers will come despite the length of the lane." In today's business world, Gu's world, such an approach no longer applies. White Cloud, back so soon?
Yes, the librarians were very helpful. I photocopied lots of useful information on American marketing, brochures from Madison Avenue, that kind of thing, and hurried back as quickly as I could. Oh, and by the way, did Mr. Gu come through with a new heating unit as he promised?
Yes, this morning.
In that case, if it's okay with you, I'll just take a quick shower.
Of course. Yes?
It's me, boss. I was just wondering, I'm not too far away. Maybe I could call round? There are one or two things about the case I wanted to talk over with you.
Talk over? Yes, certainly, but, not here. The noodle place, where we met before. I'll see you there.
You okay, boss? You look a little flushed.
It's nothing. I'm fine. I hurried. That's all. So, what was it you wanted to talk about?
It's Party Secretary Lee. He keeps bugging me. Twice yesterday and once today already. Have we singled out a prime suspect? How close are we to making an arrest?
He's been phoning me too. Apparently, since the announcement of her death, sales of Yin's book have mushroomed, overseas especially. And there are already reports in the Western press of the authorities here dragging their heels over the investigation. But even so, there's no way he should be pressuring you. The ultimate responsibility is mine, after all. I'll speak with him later.
Thanks, boss.
How are things going otherwise?
I keep finding myself going round in circles. Pei Shen said it was like one of those mysteries of yours, and I think she's right. Look. Here, the timetable. 6:40, Lan Lan enters Yin's room. Sees the body. Then another minute maybe, 2 at most, before she starts shouting for help. By 6:45, the first residents are there, and so on until the shrimp woman arrives, just before the clock strikes the hour.
And it's her testimony, the shrimp woman, you're relying on to prove no one entered or left the building during that time?
Yeah, she was sitting directly opposite the rear door, just yards away.
Then why did it take her a good 15 minutes to get to Yin's room?
I don't know.
If she were as close as you say, she should have been one of the first. She would have heard Lan Lan screaming, other people running. Surely she wouldn't have carried on sitting on her stool peeling shrimp.
Perhaps she was frightened. Too frightened to move.
Or perhaps something else detained her. Or somebody.
She could be covering up for someone. Is that what you're thinking?
It's not impossible. Talk to her again. Push her a little. See what she says. Meantime, I'm going to talk to Huang Shan at the Writers' Association. He may be able to shed some light on Yin's literary activities and the manuscript we found.
You do think it's relevant to the case, then?
That's my hunch. But how or why, I still have no idea.
I can see no objection, Inspector, to your seeing Yin's file. There, you see? Several months ago, she applied for a renewal of her passport and a visa to visit the United States. A small American university had offered her a temporary fellowship and invited her as a visiting scholar for the next academic year.
And the university was funding her visit?
Not exactly. In terms of money, the fellowship was largely symbolic. A literary agency in New York provided an affidavit offering financial support. Without that, it's unlikely her visa application would have stood a chance.
Financial support for a year. What were they hoping to gain, do you think?
The rights to publish something of Yin's in the United States, I'd assume. But, as far as I know, she'd written nothing new.
She had been editing a collection of Yang's translations of classical Chinese poetry, but that would hardly be a big potential seller in America, surely.
I wouldn't have thought so. A sequel to Death of a Chinese Professor, maybe. But otherwise, I wish I could help you more, Chen Sao, but I'm at a loss.
If you do think of anything.
Of course, I'll let you know.
Morning, Peng. Oh, it's cold here. Peeling shrimp on your stool.
It's cold here every morning, Comrade Detective.
You remember talking to me before?
I'm old, not senile.
And you remember what you told me about the morning Yin was murdered?
That I was where I am now, sitting right across from the back door to her building. And apart from Lan Lan, until the ambulance arrived, nobody went in or out.
And in all that time you never moved away?
That's correct. And you know why? The food market pays by the weight of the finished product. I can't even afford time to go to my chamber pot.
You work very hard, I know. But also know that on the morning of Yin's death, you got to her room seconds before the clock began striking 7.
So?
So with the back door open, you must have heard Lan Lan shouting for help a good 15 minutes earlier.
Yes. And if I did?
Simple. Why did it take you so long to get to Yin's room?
Wait, yes. There was something I remember now. The green onion cake booth. It's always noisy. The owner hawking his wares from morning to night. But that particular morning it was louder than usual. There was an argument, that's right, about payments. I stepped out into the main lane to see what was going on. Quite forgotten till now.
How long would you have been gone?
Oh, just a minute or two, I swear.
Long enough for someone to have slipped out the back door without you noticing?
I suppose so. I'm sorry, Comrade Detective. I wouldn't do anything to prevent you catching the murderer of that poor woman. She didn't deserve what happened to her.
Sounds as though you really liked her.
Was that such a surprise?
Very few of her neighbours put a good word in for her.
She was always very kind to me. Gave me things. Little things, mainly. Once, 3 or 4 years ago, she gave me a plastic folding chair. Almost brand new. She bought it for her nephew.
Oh, what?
Her nephew. He was visiting from the country somewhere. Just a boy. 13 or 14, I suppose. Never knew his name. She bought the chair so he could sleep in the courtyard.
How long did he stay?
4 or 5 days.
And think now, have you seen him since?
No, never.
You sure about that?
Yes, Comrade Detective. And he can't have changed so very much in just a few years. I'd recognise him anywhere.
She has a nephew.
Apparently, yes.
I thought we did a check on all of Yin's relatives.
We did, and came up blank. And wait, there's more. You were right about the shrimp woman. There's a gap of 2 or 3 minutes in which someone could have left the building unseen. But, from the timings, not right after committing the crime.
One thing I learned, looking at the plans of those old Schukerman buildings, that all usable space was precious. Between rooms, between floors, under stairs. It's quite possible there was somewhere close to Yin's room where the murderer could have hidden and waited for his chance.
Surely old Liang would have known and pointed it out.
Old Liang's been a residence cop for too many years. He only sees what he wants to see.
Right. This time I'll go round on my own and not leave a floorboard unturned.
And I'll pay the Shanghai Archives Bureau a visit and see if I can't get a more accurate list of Yin's relatives. Give this nephew a name.
Right, boss.
White Cloud?
Yes?
That early draft Mr. Gu wanted to show one of his investors. Put something together for him, will you? I'll be back as soon as I can.
Of course, Chen Sao. I'm sure Mr. Gu will be pleased.
Chen speaking.
You were right, boss. Spot on. There's a hollowed out space under the staircase, just along the corridor from Yin's room. All manner of junk inside. Everything from an old bike wheel to a 3-legged chair. But someone could hide in there as long as they were small enough, or agile enough. And there's a view right out through the rear door.
Good work. Now all we need to do is find out who was there.
How about you? How did it go at the Archives Bureau?
Maddening. They kept me hanging around for what seemed like hours. And then when I finally got access to Yin's family tree, the same answer as before. Plenty of nieces, no nephews.
Perhaps Peng was wrong about him being a nephew.
Perhaps. We've got to hurry. Let's talk again later. White Cloud, sorry I was so long. What's wrong?
Chen Sao.
What is it? Was something wrong with the proposal?
No, it's not that. Mr. Gu was thrilled. It's your mother. She's been taken into hospital.
When?
More than an hour ago. Some trouble with her stomach, apparently.
You should have called me.
I did, several times. Your phone must have been switched off.
The Archives Bureau, they insisted.
When I couldn't get hold of you, I rang Mr. Gu.
Gu? What on earth for?
Quite a few of the senior doctors are frequent visitors to the Dynasty Club. I thought you might be able to pull a few strings.
Mother, how are you? I'm sorry I couldn't get here sooner.
That's all right. You don't have to worry. That nice young woman you have working for you now called and explained. And anyway, I'm fine. When I saw the doctor this morning, I told him about these pains in my stomach, and he said I should come in for tests. Just as a precaution. A lot of fuss about nothing, I expect. Just that silly old ulcer playing up again. You can't get rid of me yet.
Well, I have to say, you look better than I've seen you in weeks.
I'm properly rested, that's why. This bed is much more comfortable than the one I have at home.
I'm still surprised to see you in a private room.
I thought it was something to do with your position at the police bureau.
Not exactly. White Cloud, I didn't expect to see you here.
Mr. Gu asked me to bring your mother these flowers.
That's kind of him.
How is she? Is she feeling any better?
Much better, thank you. It seems to have been something that suddenly flared up and has subsided of its own accord. The tests will tell.
I'm so pleased. Mr. Gu will be too, I'm sure.
He's been very good to us. To my mother, the flowers and everything, the private room. But when you next speak to him...
Yes?
It doesn't matter. I don't like to be indebted, that's all.
Mr. Gu is naturally a generous man.
You think so?
Why else would he do the things he does? I almost forgot. Mr. Wang called you from the Writers' Association. He said, could you ring him back?
Hello?
Huangshan, it's Chen Sao.
Thanks for getting back to me. It may be nothing, but you remember asking me if I knew anything new Yin might have been writing? Something the American publisher might have been interested in.
You've thought of something?
Yes, but not by Yin herself. And it may not even be true, but There were rumors back when he was still a professor that Yang had been writing a novel, a sort of Chinese Dr. Zhivago, I believe.
Suddenly, here was something that made sense. Remembering how successful Dr. Zhivago was commercially, I can well believe that an American publisher might be prepared to take a financial risk in the hope of getting their hands on an international bestseller. But that still leaves the question of whether the novel actually exists.
Ah, Yang's famous missing novel. The one he is supposed to have written all those years ago.
You know about it, then?
It is one of the most whispered about legends in Chinese publishing. The kind of rumour with which we publishers like to tease ourselves, like armchair prospectors who dream of one day finding gold.
So there is no such novel. Is that what you're saying?
I think not.
Yin herself, she never spoke of it?
No, and when I asked her directly the last time we met, she denied its existence outright.
When was that?
Oh, 3 or 4 years ago. Quite an awkward occasion, really. She came to the office with Yang's grandnephew, a young man named Bao Hong, from Jiangxi province, I believe.
Grandnephew? I'd never heard anything of a grandnephew. I thought we'd established there were no close relatives living.
Yin wanted me to explain to him why she was entitled to what she'd been paid for editing the volume of his granduncle's poetry that we'd published. Bao seemed to think that, especially as Yin and Yang had not been officially married, some at least of the money should have gone to him.
He was the legitimate heir, then?
So he seemed to believe. But who knows?
You sent him packing?
Far from it. Rather than become involved in some lengthy dispute, we agreed to make a one-off payment equivalent to 30% of the original advance. It was not a great deal, after all.
And you haven't seen nor heard from him since?
Bao, no. And now, Chen Sao, if you'll excuse me, there's a production meeting.
Of course. Oh, just one more thing. Did Yin ever approach you about publishing a collection of Yang's English translations of classical Chinese poetry?
Once, in a letter. At the time, I said I didn't think it would be viable. Though now, with all this extra publicity... Oh, it's a shame Yin didn't live long enough to see her success. Death of a Chinese Professor is about to go into his second edition.
Jiangxi Police Bureau?
Yes.
This is Chief Inspector Chen of the Special Case Squad here in Shanghai. I'd like you to check an individual's address for me. Bao Hong, 17, 18 years of age, no more.
I'll do what I can.
Get back to me on this number. It's important.
Right away.
Thank you.
I'm glad to hear your mother's tests came back negative.
Yes, she should be back home in a day or so.
If it's all right with you, I'll go now. I've a lecture at college this evening.
Of course. I'll just do a little more work on this section of the proposal.
I'm sorry, I almost forgot. Someone from the Jiangxi Police Bureau phoned. They said to tell you Bao left there for Shanghai about a year ago.
They didn't have an address for him, I suppose?
Yes, from his mother. I noted it down. It's on your desk. Bye.
Hello?
Make whatever excuses to pay Chin are necessary, Detective, but we've got work to do. Jungong Road in the Yangpu District, number 361. I'll meet you there. According to his mother, he's been staying here with a group of friends from the same village.
Because that's what he told his mother. That doesn't mean it's necessarily true.
Yes? Who are you? What do you want?
Bao Hong?
Yes.
I'm Chief Inspector Chen of the Special Case Squad, and this is Detective Yu.
Special Case Squad?
Your roommates, are they in?
Out.
Good.
We're investigating the murder of Yin Liga on the morning of the 7th of February.
Murder?
Where were you that morning between the hours of 6:15 and 7?
I don't know what you're talking about.
You better sit down, lad. We know everything.
I don't know what you mean.
You have two choices. Cooperate and tell us exactly what happened. It could be that there are circumstances which might lead to the court recommending leniency. Or clam up and make us drag it out of you. In which case, you can only expect the worst.
Oh.
Best sit down, as the detective says. Tell us in your own words what happened.
I went round to see Yin at the beginning of January. I'd been looking for work and not having much luck. I didn't know how much longer my friends would let me stay on here without paying any rent. And I still didn't see why she should have got all the money from my great-uncle's poems. It's not as if she wrote them after all. Just to calm me down, she told me there was more of my great-uncle's stuff she was hoping to get published, some stuff he'd translated or something. And when that happened, she'd give me half the money. But after a month or so, when I didn't hear anything, I went back. I was desperate by this time. I sneaked in when she left to do her Tai Chi and waited. That was when she told me the poems might never be published, and even if they were, it might not be for years. I said that wasn't fair. She'd been lying to me all along, and she said I could think what I wanted, and she didn't care because she was going to America and never coming back. And that's when I lost my temper, really lost my temper, and she started screaming, and I grabbed the pillow off the bed and pressed it against her face to shut her up. I didn't mean to kill her. I didn't. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Not sorry enough to have called for help when she might still have been saved? Or to stop you from making a quick search of the room in case there was something valuable worth stealing? Arresting Detective Yu for the murder of Yin Ligo. The manuscript of the book your great-uncle had written. I expect it was in a box somewhere in Yin's room. Where is it now?
It's there, under the bed.
So, not another Catcher in the Rye, but another Dr. Zhivago, maybe. I have some serious reading to do.
Yang's manuscript. How did you know?
I didn't. Not for sure. But it was the only thing that made sense. The only thing an American publisher would think worth paying that kind of money for. A Chinese Zhivago written by a martyr to Chinese tyranny. And a first ever publication at that. You can imagine the publicity. The book that tells the truth about China. The only one they didn't dare publish themselves.
But why, when Yin had a safe deposit box, did she run the risk of keeping it in her room?
I don't know. It could be she purposely rented a bank box so people would assume anything of value was there and not in her room. Or she just couldn't bear the idea of Yang's words being locked away in a cold vault. She had to keep them close. People enthralled to memory do strange things. Whatever the reason, the important thing is that Yang's novel has survived and is here in my hands. At least, one copy of it is. The original will be submitted along with other evidence at Bao's trial and, I'm sure, will be confiscated by internal security as soon as that trial is over. The government is not yet ready for Yang's tale of the socialist revolution to be told. But in time, 5 years, 10... Like the author of Dr. Zhivago, it's clear from his novel that Yang had passionately loved his country. His novel is not an attack on China, far from it. And China should be proud that such an excellent literary work was produced in the darkest moments of its history. It is here, in Yang's own country, that his book should first be published, not America.
So, comrade, here we are again. Early spring and we can drink to your recent successes.
I don't know if I'd go so far as to call it success.
Comrade, you're always too modest. Think what you've achieved in a short time. A business proposal delivered and thankfully accepted. Our American partners were most impressed. And a murderer apprehended. The remainder of your payment should be in your account by close of business tomorrow.
Thank you.
I wonder, what will you do with your newfound wealth? A bigger apartment, perhaps? Somewhere more suitable for your mother. Sure, that would be appreciated. The act of a dutiful son. You could even afford a little secretary of your own. Shame you and White Cloud didn't hit it off.
Didn't hit it off?
Yeah, I think it upset her a little. You know how these young girls are.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Quite by chance, I overheard a conversation she was having with a friend. Young people with their cell phones nowadays, you know how they are. At first, I didn't think it could be you she was talking about, Chen Sao. Then I realized it was. Bookish, she said. Old-fashioned, politically correct. Yeah, of course, I didn't hear everything. Too timid to take a risk over something he really wants. I did hear that. But look, let's not concern ourselves with what might have been. Let's drink a toast to the future.
To the future.
Oh, speaking of which, there is just one small fly in the ointment when New World is concerned. But I'm sure when I explain, it's something you can help to smooth away. It's a matter of changing the parking restrictions for the new centre. As you can imagine, once the centre's open, there'll be a great deal more traffic, and for whatever reason, the traffic control office are dragging their heels. You know the director there, I believe. In fact, weren't you acting director yourself before taking up your current position?
So that's how it will be after all. Use or be used. Part of the new philosophy. When Gu offered me this overpaid translation project and sent me White Cloud as a little secretary, when he had a new heater installed in my apartment and my mother moved to a private room, he did so knowing that with each of these I accepted, I would be placing myself deeper and deeper in his debt. Another saying from this burgeoning capitalist world I have been forced to learn: there is no such thing as a free lunch.
In When Red is Black by Chu Xiaolong, dramatised by John Harvey, Inspector Chen was played by Jamie Zubairi, Detective Yu by Dan Lee, Pei Jin by Sarah Lam, Gu by Ewan Bailey, Party Secretary Lee by Daniel York, and White Cloud by Elizabeth Chan. Old Liang was played by Gerard McDermott, Huang by Richard Pebble, Chun's mother by Tina Chiang, Chiao Ming by Chris Pavlo, Pung by Deborah Baker, Bao by Leo Wan, and Jia by George Watkins. The director was David Hunter.